Good morning, everyone. I'm Craig Mooson, and my wife, Chris and Sarah, were on the November 2024 pilgrimage. The Community Renewal Society of Chicago had invited us to be part of the pilgrimage. In part, our work since the 1980s have been with Central American and refugees from around the world and seeking asylum in the United States. And we were asked to compare our work with refugees in the Western Hemisphere with the rights of Palestinians. And it was illuminating and educating for us. This presentation comes out of what we did in Bethlehem last November, and we'll go from there.
So what Tan was trying to explain is we were asked, because of the presentation that we gave as a part of that international delegation in November 2024, we were asked to submit a chapter for this international publication that Sabeel is putting together. And when we submitted that chapter a few weeks ago, Tan asked if we would do a presentation for Kumi Now. If you go back one screen, just to give you the context, we are in Chicago. This is on DuSable Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, the main thoroughfare along Lake Michigan. And this is from what Christians for Ceasefire, Mennonite Action, some of the actions. This was just a few months ago, and we basically took over the bridge of Lakeshore Drive, hanging banners on both sides, people crossing, people passing underneath, part of the actions that we continue in Chicago. So on the left side, you see, actually in the middle there with the beautiful yellow and orange necklace, that's Reverend Dr. Waltrina Middleton, the executive director of the Community Renewal Society. And she's the one who invited Craig and I to be a part of the Community Renewal Society delegation joining the Sabeel International delegation. So that's a picture of most of the CRS delegation on the left side. And on the right side is when Craig and I were at Pastor Munther Isaac's church in Bethlehem as a part of a panel giving our presentation.
Sadly, we've recognized that a lot has happened since November 2024. And our paper was difficult saying. In our paper, we took sort of a semi-positive attitude that people of faith working with lawyers could address inequalities in the law, although it might not happen quickly. We talked about working with the sanctuary movement in the United States and with asylum pro bono lawyers and told that story. We're going to tell a little bit of that here, but we also want to recognize how much worse things have become in terms of the rule of law. We have a new administration since November of 2024. The alleged border czar in the United States says, we don't care what judges think, we're going to come after you. And they certainly have. At the same time, we know that in Palestine and Israel, there's a disrespect for both domestic and international law. And we can cite hundreds of headlines like these, but the way people act with impunity and disrespect for the law. As a lawyer, myself, and ordained clergy, it saddens me, and we're going to talk about suggestions we have in terms of that. But we just want to give you a sense. We're not trying to say Chicago is the equivalent of the West Bank, but we've had a certain amount of violence in our city since November 24. We have a local processing center, which was not an overnight detention center in Broadview.
And so what you see here is one of many, many headlines and stories, which you probably have heard from wherever you are in the world, about the terror of ICE, masked and armed, and taking peaceful protesters, throwing them to the ground, tear gassing them. This is outside of Broadview, which is which was closed down as a detention center just outside of Chicago. People have been praying there and acting there for almost 2 decades and peacefully protesting. And this is what ICE has been doing here at the Broadview Center.
And sometimes images can speak 1,000 words. We saw this photo of a Presbyterian minister who was praying in the street and was then hit with pepper balls and tear gas. But it resonated for many of you. When I saw this of a certain generation, my thoughts immediately went to Sorry, my. There we go. And that was a photo that happened in 1968 in Vietnam, in many ways changed the mood. So not that I want violence anywhere, but I wonder if some of these photos will help us. And that we are seeing many of the videotapes of the violence in the United States, changing moods, changing activities.
And because of the incredible unlawful violence of Border Patrol and ICE, the Immigration and Custom Enforcement here in the United States, and most recently in Chicago, there are many lawsuits now against ICE. Here we are. So we have armed, masked men in the West Bank. Again, with trying, aiming for an erasure of a people here in the States. Many in the current administration are trying to erase immigrants in this country. And in Israel, there is the attempt to erase the Palestinian people. And here you have in the West Bank, on the left-hand side, you have the West Bank with soldiers and settler violence against Palestinians. And on the right-hand side, that's right here outside of Chicago at Broadview.
And just, this is a U.S. officer shooting at lay people and clergy peacefully protesting and trying to pray. It's a pepper ball gun, but it still causes injury. And again, the view is sort of just chilling.
So I want you to look at these three neighborhoods. On the left, that's Brighton Park, a neighborhood in Chicago with ICE. On the right, you see the small playground. That's at Al-Malkaher, where we were last November with the Bedouin community. And in the background, you see a third neighborhood, and that's a settler neighborhood. Which of these is the safest? Well, on the left-hand side, people were terrorized. Car windows were broken open. People were torn out of their cars in Chicago and pepper sprayed, tear gassed, and abducted. Even those people, like some of the people like ourselves, who are allies, who were standing in support of the people being terrorized, were abducted and hurt. On the right-hand side, at the Bedouin community, we know that there has been an order of demolition for this community in southern Hebron, in Al-Malkaher. And that playground, the community center right next to it, and most of the buildings are threatened with demolition. And yet right across the road is the settler community. And actually, as I stood right in that playground talking to Eid, one of the leaders, he pointed to that settlement and he said, they are Semitic. And he pointed to himself, we are Semitic. Why can't we find a way to live in peace? On the left-hand side, this is a protest that happened the day after the terrorization of a daycare in Chicago. So there was ICE, and you see it on the right-hand side, forced themselves into a daycare with little children and abducted a teacher and went from room to room, terrorizing the families, these little children, and the teachers in that school, and took her away, and the community has risen up in response.
So a little bit about our paper that we gave and how that led to this. I'm going to spend a little bit just on asylum. And you might ask why asylum, in part because that's what Chris and I have been working on for the last 40 years in many ways. But also we know from liberation theologians that we need to listen to the voice of the vulnerable and the oppressed. And as Hannah Arendt pointed out, in many ways, refugees who have left the protection of their own nation, because perhaps their nation has betrayed them through persecution, in many ways are the most vulnerable, because who protects those who have no rights? And we're going to try to make that link by looking at how did we get asylum law and what's happening and how the Palestinians are different than many of the other refugees that we work with. But this is the basic definition of how one gets asylum: past persecution on a well-founded fear, but it's very limited. It kind of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And so we have case law in the United States. Sadly, the case law has gotten more restrictive, but we'll explain that a little bit. One of the key elements of the Refugee Act and the Convention of 1951. So our Refugee Act, the United States, wasn't passed till 1980, but is based on the principles of the 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1967 Protocol of the convention. And this non-refoulement, the French word not returned, right? A refugee in any manner whatsoever to the frontiers of territories where their life or freedom would be threatened. Again, on those 5 categories. This is a border wall in Sonora, Mexico. This is taken from the Mexican sign. And you can see kind of the graffiti, much like we see in Palestine, all the walls must fall, right? And this wall shall fall too. But this is kind of this border wall was erected pre-Trump, but it's kind of what he wants to expand in this country. Now, one of the things that I think we forget about is that the Refugee Act was a humanitarian act. I don't know if you know this photo, it's a very famous photo, the children, the Jewish children on the St. Louis that left Europe seeking with lawful visas to go to Cuba and then never made it. They got to Cuba, were turned away, and they came up on the US coast and were turned away. And 700 of them were sent back to Europe at the beginning of World War II. But it's interesting, as I was reading Gilad Ben-Nun's book, that how many of the drafters of the Refugee Convention were Jewish scholars of international law and Talmudic law, and that the humanitarian motivations of them were crystal clear. So much so, and I've been doing this for many years, I didn't learn this till doing this paper, that the drafter of Article 3033, the non-refoulement provision, said, quote, fulfills one of the ethically unsurpassed prescriptions of Jewish law, particularly stressed by the earlier prophets. One of them, Amos, considered that the prohibiting of sending refugees back to be a binding rule of international law for this time. That this idea goes very back to the prophetic nature of that. Now, we recognize, and we in our paper, we quote Reverend Munther Isaac and others, that this issue of post-Holocaust is very sensitive in the Palestinian issue. The famous quote that many Western Christians who are guilty about something they didn't do in the Holocaust end up ignoring the plight of Palestinians today because of their guilt of something they didn't do. So I recognize that, and I think it's important to understand that this, can we call refugee law back to its humanitarian aspects? Because one of the key aspects of the Convention of 1951 was that refugee law should be geographically and ideologically neutral. The idea is any human being who's subject to persecution should not be sent back. You often hear this, so keep that in mind, and we realize that tightrope we're walking on this. But it's also this key thing that the drafters recognized, that to send someone back to get the paperwork to do regular immigration law, we wouldn't send Jews back to the Gestapo to say, get your paperwork before you can enter the United States or the United Kingdom. So that the law itself recognizes that often asylum seekers have to break immigration laws. And so that's the whole rhetoric about illegal immigrants crossing borders has this amnesia about that idea that they may have to do that, and we'll recognize that. Unfortunately, because of the effect at the time, the Palestinians, the state of Israel is being formed in the UN at the same time the Refugee Convention is being drafted. And there were 2 agencies in the UN that were working with Palestinians. So the convention gets this language in paragraph 1D, and this has been one of the problems for the Palestinian issue, is that we were not going to require Palestinians to go through the individual assessment of the convention because they're already being protected by the UN. Sadly, one of those 2 agencies stopped working very few years after 1951, and the other was UNRWA, but that's not a protection. It's not a legal protection agency. So it puts Palestinians in a very difficult position. And then you get the combination of the Nakba in 1948, and there's a lot of historical debate about how intentional it was to make it permanent, but because of the way it happened and the brutality and the way it was implemented, it exiled refugees and prevented return. So we have this issue. Where do refugees go once they're out of a nation? We have that convention. The convention initially didn't apply to Palestinians. But the question is, since the agency in the UN that was protecting Palestinians no longer exists, how should they be protected today? So that's a real quick thing, given our time constraints. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Went backwards. Am I?
Click right there.
Go here. So in our paper, we talk about two major responses to the problems of the evisceration of asylum law into the 1980s. One was the Central Americans were being discriminated against and not being granted asylum. So we recruited volunteer lawyers. We created agencies that would recruit lawyers and to do asylum cases. And out of that, we started winning asylum cases. And then we found out that discrimination was real. And so lawyers got together and actually sued in a class action that the judges had discriminated. And we had a case called the American Baptist Church case. And we ended up reopening every denied Guatemalan and Salvadoran asylum case from 1980 to 1990. So it had a little bit of way the law can work.
So in the 1983, this Salvadoran family is sitting in Wellington United Church of Christ in Chicago, the church that we are a part of. And they had come, there were over 300 churches across the United States in the 1980s that broke the unofficial law of harboring, and we welcomed in asylum-seeking families for safe haven within our churches. This is now illegal under the current administration, but this particular family was welcomed. And they also were a part of the decades and decades of the U.S. School of the Americas, also known as the School of Assassins, which has been responsible for tens of hundreds of thousands of murders, massacres, tortures, and disappearances, people throughout Central and South America at the hands of the U.S. military, training Latin American military. What does this sound like? This is a parallel to a lot of the training and violence within Israel, of the Israeli, not only the Israeli soldiers, but the Israelis supplying with U.S. support, the settlers armed and fighting against and annihilating the genocide. Here you have a picture from when we were in, this is right outside of northern Gaza. We are up on a hill actually seeing the genocide in real time in Gaza.
And the tension in our paper, again, is this question: is international law futile, irrelevant? If you read Nora Ereckat's book, she comes out a little bit more positive than this sentence, but this is the real issue we're facing: is how do we make the law real? I would note that some of those refugees in the that we received asylum in the 80s and also who were in the sanctuary movement testified and led to some of the first convictions of Salvadoran colonels' leadership for torture and violation of human rights. So again, one of our hopes. But we see what's happening in Gaza, and look at this. If you can read very closely, this is an actual ad from the U.S. Department of Justice to recruit immigration judges. But if you look down at the very small print at the bottom, help write the new chapter of America, apply today to become a deportation judge. There's nowhere in the language of the statute that talks about judges being deportation judges. Their job is to see if people are eligible to avoid deportation. And therefore, that's what we're kind of moving into now with the changes since November of 2024. These are some of the things the new Trump administration put in the very first day of inauguration that really undermines all that humanitarian impulses for, and that we're fighting. And many of these are being litigated right now, and it's still an open question, but it's just even halting refugee admissions and the like. So it's the battle, the legal battle we're in now is trying to end some of these. So we want to talk about this intent for mass deportation.
Right. So you see U.S. Border Patrol, and on the right, this is the new fence, that same border wall all the way across, covers most of the land across the southern United States and Mexico. The border walls, like the border walls that we saw and are there, and all the checkpoints. You have to, even in the U.S., you get a certain distance from the border, you still have to go through checkpoints with Border Patrol stopping you and checking who you are and who is in the car, just like we experience and people experience every day in Israel, Palestine.
Trump pledges to get rid of millions of undocumented. These are the numbers they're saying. We question these numbers, but this is what they're bragging about. One example, if you notice in reading this, they talk about people voluntarily departed. So we are getting stories of people who were arrested and put in detention like at Broadview, and they're not given a chance to call their lawyer or even given food until they sign a paper saying they voluntarily deport. So we're not sure how many of those are really true. And we're also seeing innocent people being deported. And this, what we saw as almost kind of reminiscent of what Israel did in the Nakba and pushing people out of the country. Let someone else deal with it. The Trump administration sending people to other countries, including into one of the most notorious torture prisons in El Salvador, when this individual had withholding of removal and yet was sent by mistake, and we're still litigating to get him out of jail.
And you think of the administrative detention with hundreds and thousands of people in Palestine abducted and disappeared into administrative detention by the Israeli government.
And this is an example of we're sending people to Eswatini and Palau because they're trying to externalize asylum control and get people sent around the world where there won't be protection.
So here we are in the US. The enforcement of ICE, most of them are masked. We have, because of what happened in Chicago, and Chicago was already very well organized through the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant and Refugee Rights and many communities already in place. But what happened as ICE started attacking and abducting people is that communities, people who never stepped out to do anything before, all of a sudden were wearing whistles. They were volunteering at local schools. This is still current, at local schools to be able to walk children to and from school because they were too afraid to even come. In my school, I teach in a directly impacted community, a Latinx community in Little Village in Chicago, in a Chicago public school. 3 times we were on lockdown. 3 times we were on lockdown. And one day, 2 preschool parents were abducted in front of the children with guns and masked men taking their parents away. Here we are. We're in Israel, Palestine, and you see, as most of you as a part of Sabeel and Kumi now have been to Palestine, you see the road on the left. You have very different roads if you are Palestinian than if you are an Israeli Jew. And on the right-hand side, you see those border walls, which parallel U.S. border walls with Mexico.
And the pastor's words are so appropriate for being invisible because our legal walls and our physical walls make people invisible. When they detain people without access to attorneys or family, we don't know where they are, and they may be in a third country before. Again, this is the border wall in Mexico, Arizona. I had jury duty. I came out of jury duty one day, and this ICE car is circling the courthouse. How can people go to court if they're afraid they might get picked up? Because they're picking up U.S. citizens as well as people. If your color is brown, there's more likelihood they'll stop and arrest you.
So on the left-hand side, you see Israeli prison. That's on one of the major highways leaving Jerusalem going north. And on the right-hand side, that is Eloy Detention Center, just north of the Arizona border. You see the parallels.
And much like Israel, immigration is a civil violation. So people are detained for months and years on a civil violation rather than a criminal violation.
This was in Ramallah on our delegation. And Leanne Nasser on the left with myself. And the reason that I have this photo there is what Leanne and I were talking about after she talked to us about her daughter, Leanne, who was one of the 11,000 who was abducted into administrative detention, disappeared. She had not seen her daughter. Her daughter on April 7th of 2024 had been taken and abducted. This was November of 2024, and she had not seen her once. The lawyer had only seen her a couple times. We were hoping for her to be released in December. And what I talked to Leanne about was a dear friend of and colleague of ours, Adriana Barto, who is from Guatemala, whose baby sister, two of her daughters, her father, her stepmother, they were all disappeared by the Guatemalan army. And we talked about abduction and disappearance and the attempted erasure of a people. And that is what this image is from.
Detention is an industry now. And right now we have about 60,000 people detained in the United States, but the new budget, they want 100,000. But you can see every state in the United States has some kind of immigration detention facility. It struck me, this is Eloy again. At sunset one night, I saw the 3 telephone poles reminding me of the cross and the message the U.S. is sending that will put you in detention and ruin your life. And it's happening now as much as it happened in biblical times. So we're moving now to what's the choice for faith people, for lawyers, for those of us who are both. I've written an article about us Christians. We have to decide. The poster on the right is the MAGA Jesus, the ones that the Christian nationalists follow. And this was the destruction of our Capitol on January 6th after the inauguration of Joe Biden. And then this is Migrant for Life, that we have a choice to make. And the choice is important because the torture that's going on both in Israel and here, John Conroy's written this really amazing book about torture in Israel, in Ireland, and Chicago, and talking about how millions of people know what's going on, but they're bystanders and they don't know how to act and they remain immobilized, and how much an issue it is that indicts our societies. We, as a biblical faith, have the Good Samaritan, other messages to say, what's our choice? To let the torture go on or to be the neighbor? Just real quickly, we have some advances in law. A judge who actually goes to a local parish here in Chicago has said profoundly concerned about some of the immigration tactics of tear gassing and the like, and has tried to stop that. So we're seeing some victories in the lower courts right now. But the question is the resilience we need. Here's another case in the District of Columbia, DC, Washington, DC, that again has tried to restrict it, but noting the difference that for three decades, we tried to follow the law, and now we have these torture and terrible exams.
So we're going to end with some slides from Chicago to Chicago area and the resistance and resilience of Kumi, of rising up now. There's a huge coalition. Chicago's the largest population of Palestinians in the United States. And there's a coalition of many different Palestinian groups called the Coalition for Justice in Palestine. And this was a march that happened in October on the second anniversary of the original massacre and then the genocide to follow. This is at Holy Name Cathedral. You'll see on the right-hand side in the green, Candace, and next to her in the black jacket, Lawrence. They were also part of the CRS delegation that Craig and I joined and became leaders. They have not been involved in speaking out about Palestine prior to that. So kudos to CRS and to Waltrina Middleton, who put that delegation together to join Sabeel, because since then they have been very much a part of speaking out. And this was downtown Chicago on the Feast of the Holy Innocents. This was just this fall. Again, this was Lakeshore Drive, and we hung children's clothes on both sides. We hung banners that said no more genocide in Gaza, stop killing children. And we took over the bridge, and we were there for a good couple hours before the police came, and we very slowly took down what we had up. This is another group. This is a group that Sunshine Puppeteers, and they decided to have a pro-Palestine puppet parade. And so many of us were able to join this throughout the lakefront of downtown Chicago. This is the Democratic National Convention and Christians for Ceasefire, of which we're part through Mennonite Action here in Chicago. Was out as a part of the Coalition for Justice in Palestine, and tens of thousands of people who were protesting the fact that throughout that convention, Palestine was not on the floor. This is from actually before we left for Palestine. We were already involved in this work. This is Mennonite Action, Christians for Ceasefire at a Good Friday. And you see all the shoes behind there, which were representing some of the genocide in Gaza. On the left-hand side, through Mennonite Action, there are these pop-ups for children of Gaza. And we travel to different parts of the city, major intersections, and get lots and lots of interaction from many Palestinians as well as non-Palestinians to bring to mind the children of Gaza. And on the right-hand side, we were a part of the international 40-day fast here in the United States. It was Veterans for Peace and their allies. So this was a press conference that happened. This was up at the Great Lakes Naval Base at the end of September. National Guard was being threatened to send here. The Chicago mayor and governor said no. The people of Illinois said no. They never actually, they were going to be deployed here at the Great Lakes Naval Base north of Chicago. And migrant and allied communities came out to say no one is illegal on stolen land. And you will see throughout these protests, many people wear keffiyehs, and as we marched and sang and prayed, the prayers were as much for immigrants as they were for Palestine. This is right outside of Broadview. This was just about a month ago, and it was a prayer vigil. Again, you see many people wearing keffiyehs. This is a protest about Broadview and to say no to ICE and the violence and cruelty against immigrants, and Palestine is right there in the mix. This is our some folks from our church community on the left-hand side as a part of the first No Kings March, which happened this was the Chicago, part of the Chicago March. And coming up, you see Reverend Dr. Walterina Middleton on the right-hand side, who led our Sabile CRS delegation portion, and myself. We are speaking this coming Saturday. So because we show up, because we rise up, we have been invited to be a part of a solidarity panel. The AMP convention is the largest gathering of Palestinians in the United States. And Waltrina and I will be a part of a solidarity panel with Jews and Christians this coming Saturday night.
So we have a choice. The law doesn't work often. Christians often don't follow the Migrant for Life, but it is possible that we can achieve if we work together. First, they came for the immigrants, then they came for the lawyers, and then they came for me. Our choice: we tear down the wall or build up people. And Chris and I thank you both. If you want to add in about your picture here.
Yeah, no, this was at the Great Lakes Naval Base. And you can see I often wear a No Human Being is Illegal t-shirt to represent migrants. And I wear a keffiyeh to connect to Palestine, and the chants and the songs integrated both of those realities because we are all connected. On the right-hand side, Craig is standing outside of a Palestinian cafe right near our house that has been terrorized twice by unknown people who have broken windows and smashed. And this was one of the responses of people lining up for blocks and blocks to support that cafe after it had been terrorized.
And we thank you for your patience. If anyone's interested, this will be part of, I've got a series of articles and some of my publications on law and religion in terms of what we've talked about. And so they're available if you're interested at the end of our slideshow. So Donna, it's back to you for Q&A.
Yeah, can you guys still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. If anyone has any questions now, it would be a good time to open it up for any discussion and questions, and I can try to read that out if you put it in the chat. It seems like some people are asking if the presentation can be shared after. So Craig, yeah, you can. I think you sent it to me earlier, but I can make sure that it's a shareable link. And if there's some articles that you also just want to share from your written work, and you can link it in the chat, I think that would be great for people to just access.
And Tom, this is recorded, so this will also go out on
yes,
Monday through Sabile, the recording, the whole recording.
Yeah. So Anne asked, has there been a judicial ruling on the presence of ICE in Chicago?
The U.S. system, so there's several cases because some involve ICE and Border Patrol, some involve the National Guard. They're different jurisdictions. And there's also state law and federal law. The reality is there's not a final decision yet. We have a number of cases that are still working their way through the courts of appeal. Some of the injunctions against ICE have been temporarily stayed, and there's probably about 20 or 30 lawsuits in different jurisdictions, including just in Chicago. So one of the issues is the federal government has a right for Border Patrol and national security, and so it makes it a little more difficult for our states to say you can't be here at all. What we can do is say you can't violate the Constitution by denying people their constitutional due process or their right to free speech and assembly.
Yeah, I also want to add, and I appreciate Jan put in the chat that many Palestinians are actively deported to countries like Hungary and South Africa. We went way over our time, so that was one of the parallels we were going to make. So thank you for doing that, because that's happening here under the U.S. administration, and it's happening in Israel, Palestine as well.
We're happy to work with you of other presentations. We've done a number. When we came back from our November trip, we've done about 5 or 6 Zoom presentations based on that trip. Obviously, this is another whole step beyond that. But Chris can put our emails in the chat if you'd like, and time and availability. We're happy to try to schedule stuff, and we just believe so strongly in the linkage of this work and then the ongoing militarization. John Conroy's work has been so influential to me in what happens when bystanders. We're saddened in Chicago. Our police have tortured young, innocent Black men. And it's so tied into the same work with imprisoning immigrants and undocumented persons. So, yes, please contact us, and we'll be happy to help if we can, through Zoom or travel if we can.
Thank you, Craig and Chris. I wonder also if you guys...
There's something else. I just want to reference Carol in the chat. She said, I found actually going out to face ICE Border Patrol much easier said than done. Fear can take over. In your experience, how do you work through that fear? How do you determine your role in the web of support and resistance? Like, how do you know how you can be of help? That is such a brilliant question. I would say, Craig and I have been in the streets. I started work supporting, thanks to my mother, who is on this Zoom at 90 years old. My parents, as Catholics, I was raised a Catholic, they supported the United Farm Workers in this country, the migrants who were raising our crops and who were brutalized in the fields. And I started working with the farm workers when I was a teenager. And I am now 67 years old. So I would say 50 years later, the more you're out there, the more you're with a community of people, you learn trust, you learn a sense of your own soul and your own peace, so that when you can respond. I happen to use song as I am a singer and a music teacher and a church musician, but I also learned a lot of music and centering through music in the streets, in protests. Anytime that I've been arrested, anytime in protesting, the brutalization that's happening at Broadview just a couple weeks ago, a couple very good friends of ours ended up in the emergency room. They were praying and they were beaten. They were beaten by state police and Cook County Sheriff, not ICE on that day. But they start singing. We start singing, and singing helps you to take a deep breath. It helps you to, if you're a person of prayer or not prayer, it helps you to center yourself and find a peace that can sustain you through those fearful times, because it is fearful. It's fearful when they're coming at you. It's fearful when there's all these armed mass people around you, whether you're in Palestine, Israel, or you're in the United States or in Canada or Europe, wherever you are in the world. But standing in solidarity with other people and calling forth whatever spirit that helps you to be grounded is what can help you remain peaceful when all around you is not.
And let me add, there's a lot of ways to oppose government enforcement. We recruit people to accompany undocumented persons to their court hearings or their hearings with the United States Customs and Immigration Enforcement, just to drive them to their meetings and to be there. And my work with asylum, I didn't do a lot with immigrants until I got thrown into this in 1984. And I started hearing the testimony, like we've heard testimony of Palestinians on our pilgrimage trips, the testimony of asylum applicants. I worked with a 65-year-old Romanian asylum. She wanted to bring Bibles into communist Romania. And I looked at her and said, how are you brave enough? And she said, my friends need the word of God. And that just challenged my faith. And here this woman was teaching me how to be brave, that she had done it in her own way. And therefore you can find ways. In Chicago, we all get orange whistles and walk around our schools. And when the kids look at you and say, people in my neighborhood are here to protect me, that gives me more courage. I could take the next step. Right? And so Chris, I have never been arrested, but I've been with a lot of people that have. But there's different ways of showing that accompaniment. And so if there's an agency in your town that does legal defense work, can you be an interpreter? Can you translate? Can you help drive people to court? And all those ways, then you get involved and you start seeing the different ways to not only be brave, but to be a good advocate.
Right. And I'd like to respond to Lyndon in the chat. Thank you very much, Lyndon, for that. She's asking, how do we make discernible impact I would say one thing is at Broadview, because relentlessly, weekly, daily, people have been out for months. We are part of people who have been there for almost 20 years, praying and protesting and enabling people to get inside. Sisters, Pat and Joanne, Mercy sisters, one of whom just died a week ago, the other one in August, in their 90s, were still protesting and praying at Broadview. We were able, ICE left. So a Border Patrol left Chicago. ICE is still here, but because of there are very few people even inside of the Broadview Center right now, because of the protests, because of the lawsuits, because of standing up. So that's one piece of it. Chicago has put out many lawsuits, and we just, at Sister Joanne's funeral yesterday, we were talking to a legal person with the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant and Refugee Rights, and Fred was telling us he has been an advisor to North Carolina and to Louisiana, because that is where ICE and Border Patrol are now upping the ante, so that we have the wisdom of experience to share with others. I know in Chicago and nationally, there's a Chevron boycott because of their support. There's the BDS movement. So we do need to do all of those things as well. And we can't all do all of them, but we can each do something. And we each need to find out the things that we can do, because as Lyndon said, we have to address the sale of weapons and anything that we can do. And I know Sabine has sent out some of those notices, and many of us have, to whoever our parliament, our governments are, to demand that they stop sending weapons to Israel.
And one of the problems we face today is the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex has gotten so huge that people are making money selling uniforms. They're making money selling Toyota trucks or vans for these people, Ford Broncos and the like. We may have to go to our local dealers that are part of that system. And it's hard because the government has realized a lot of people can make a lot of money off of detaining 100,000 people in the United States, or detaining 11,000 Palestinians. And yes, so we can look for other ways. It's not just going against Raytheon or Boeing, but those other people making money off of this. And then I had, Lyndon asked another question that I just wanted to address. Where was it?
That's it. That's her question right there.
So helping that discernible, impact on other areas, and realize how much of our lives they've learned. One of the reasons the lobbyists from the private industrial companies, just look here, I'm sorry, the private industrial companies, they get the lobbyists, so they go to Congress and say, well, we can do this. Just think of how many types of things are used in maintaining a 10,000 person prison or whatever. So look for those in our local neighborhoods and work on that. Wasn't the question.
Yeah, thank you, Craig and Chris. Those were really creative responses and kind of ways that we can engage creatively like this. So thank you for that. I don't know if you guys answered this question. I just saw this from earlier from Tom about whether some of these federal agents are being trained in or by Israel, like so many of our local police departments. Have you guys learned of anything, especially in the Chicago context, between these linkages?
Well, part of the problem, Tom, is that who is training them at all? If you want, when they turn to people like Craig and I and the communities of people, allies and migrants, and the terrorists, they're arresting the terrorists. Of the 3,000 people that have been arrested just in Chicago in the last couple of months, 94% of them had no history of arrest, no history of anything. And yet we're labeled the terrorists. We label the Border Patrol and the ICE people who have come in. And when our own state police and Cook County sheriffs are batoning and throwing people to the ground and putting them in the emergency rooms, who are the terrorists? Who is acting in a state of terrorism? In terms of who is actually training them?
Well, it goes both ways. When we did our work with the School of the Americas Watch against the training of Central and South American soldiers that would then end up executing, assassinating people and torturing people in Central and South America, we discovered that some of the Israelis were coming to the SOA and the Border Patrol was coming to the SOA. And it's in addition to training, it's also all of this electronic information. Israel has a very sophisticated electronic industry, and the border control, the surveillance. We know from our pilgrimage with Sabeel what a surveillance state Israel has become. And they're trading information. In our paper that we submitted to Sabeel, we cite several articles about companies that are making money on both sides in both countries in trying more sophisticated surveillance and control of individuals, thus limiting all our freedoms and all our First Amendment freedoms.
Yeah, and thank you, Marcia. Marcia put the Chevron boycott in the chat. So you have that. And I think a lot of you and Tom, Sabeel's done a lot around BDS. So I think those links can.
Yeah, and we also have a FOSNA just launched also, like I think maybe Marcia sent the FOSNA campaign. We have a similar campaign also with Chevron and a few other companies. So yeah, I'll send also any other links related to that if people are interested. But I wanted to ask maybe a related question just on your response about surveillance and that it's getting harder and harder for activists to advocate and even lawyers to advocate for many people who are being surveilled, especially immigrants. And so I wonder, just based on your work on the ground in Chicago, are there ways that you would recommend people act against surveillance tactics, or how, when you're working with a community, what have you kind of learned from working amidst, surveillance and mass surveillance?
Right. So some of these things we learned from in the 1980s, doing the work initially around Central America because of the infiltration of the FBI into the sanctuary movement. And people were on the Arizona border. The first community that had a sanctuary church had infiltrators, and people were arrested and taken to trial. So we've learned a lot since that time. We're very careful about the communication that we have. Even when we're in in-person meetings, our phones are not with us. They're in a locked metal container somewhere because we don't trust that our devices aren't being listened to. We're very careful in the work so I'm a part of the Sanctuary Working Group, which is a collective of 30 different Chicago area faith communities and large nonprofits that are working in support of vulnerable migrants. And we are very careful. We do not put people's names in any documents. And when we're meeting, we don't use people's names. We have an accompaniment program so that when people have an appointment with ICE and they have to show up, they're not disappearing by themselves, that we have people who are accompanying them. And so we've had to learn a lot of techniques of how to be very, very careful and how we communicate, whether it's on a phone, on a computer, or even in person.
A couple of things, and this is more probably me from my lawyer aspect. You'll notice in the chat, my email is Proton Mail, which my understanding is one of the more secure emails one can use. I don't like to use Gmail, and I do have another Outlook through work, but I try to use my private email as much as possible and use that. There's also like groups like the Electronic Freedom Foundation, Electronic Frontier Foundation out of San Francisco, that does a lot of work in trying to represent all of us for freedom from surveillance. I join that so that I get their mailings and their information, and they often send out information on ways that you can make your home more secure. and all the electronic work. I mean, we all leave an electronic footprint that's so amazing. I once did an article on this for my work as an ombudsperson, and I walked to the L. I take the L to my office. This was in like 2010. I counted 40 cameras just on my walk to work that followed me, and allegedly some for school purposes or safety on the L or the train. But just to get on the train, someone's keeping track of me getting on at that point. There are ways to try to limit that, but you have to work at it. And if that's of interest to you, I think places like the EFF, the ACLU, another organization that does some of this work, to try to limit the footprint we leave and allow us to communicate with somewhat more security.
Right.
They've got a lot of electronic resources on the other side.
And as we know, folks who have been able to go to Palestine, you know what the surveillance is like. There are cameras upon cameras and checkpoints upon checkpoints. Actually, when on our delegation at one checkpoint, a young 18, 19-year-old woman with an assault weapon got on, and she asked for passports, and Craig showed her passport, and she looked at it and she scowled. She was very angry. She took his passport and she left the bus. And when she came back on the bus, there was a maybe 21-year-old guy with her. And he looked at Craig and he said to him, "Why did you go through Jordan?" Like very angry that we hadn't gone through Tel Aviv. And Craig, knew what to say. This were the plans that were made. "And why are you here?" And he said, "We're on a holy pilgrimage." And this was, we were in the Sabeel bus. And he looked at him and laughed. So this was November of 2024. The election had already happened for US president. And he laughed and he said, "Go Trump, make America great again." So we know, we took clean phones when we went. We sent everything home. We did not keep anything on our phones when we came back into the US, when we left Israel, Palestine.
I believe it's important to be prudent and do all we can, especially since we do work with company people who are even at much more risk than we are. I don't want to jeopardize anyone else, but at the same time, at some point, my faith says you've got to be out there, and they're going to do what they're going to do, and I have to do what my faith calls me to do. And I would say Jesus helps me a lot when I try to get overwhelmed and worry about the security issues. At some point, I say, I got to take my stand. So.
Yeah. I like Carol put in the chat, the Christians for a Free Palestine related to Chevron. And we actually in Chicago, but I'm going to offer this to you all wherever you are in the world, on December 7th and December 14th, there's these huge Christkindl markets in Chicago. We're going to show up for Palestine and immigrants as well. And we're caroling for Palestine in support of immigrants. And we've just put together last night, I think we just finalized, it's got the Chevron boycott lyrics, it's got songs for liberation, caroling, it's got Tan, you'll be pleased to know a couple of the songs that we sang that Sabeel put together when we were there a year ago. We put together a whole song sheet. So I'd be happy if you want to, I put my email in the chat. I can send that to anybody who wants to use that in this upcoming season, just to be out in public with a few of you or many of you, to be caroling in an alternative way. I don't know, Sarah Ludden just came back from Palestine. I don't know if there's anything that you would like to add. She's here in Chicago and very dear friend of ours, and done a lot of work with migrants for a long time, but then decided, in part because of hearing from Craig and I when we returned, and herself starting to show up at Palestinian protests before she left. She was a part of a community peacemaker team delegation just a few weeks ago, came back. Is there anything you want to say, Sarah?
No, thank you, except I so appreciate you making these connections between the immigrant support work and the Palestinian need for Palestinian liberation, and giving so many concrete suggestions to us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for showing up. Yeah, I teach preschool through third graders, and I teach Palestine. I have the support of the teaching communities where I am. And we use I love that Jan put in there, the olive tree. There's beautiful children's books about Palestine. So I would encourage you, whatever communities you are in, to check out those books and use them in your communities so that children know about the importance of the olive tree and the resilience of the Palestinian people and the Israeli Jews who stand up in solidarity. People like, groups like Standing Together and Never Again, and all of those groups in Israel, Palestine as well.
And we saw when the previous Kumi or Sabeel Wave of Prayer, you can buy olive trees as Christmas presents.
I think you can for like the Olive Green Collective, I can send a few links. I'll put the link to what we have a Sabeel newsletter, which we release every Monday. And for the next few weeks, we're sharing links of ethical shops and ethical companies you can buy from, especially as it nears, the holiday season that you can buy, and most of the proceeds go to either supporting a community or a collective or different initiatives.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Tina put in the chat as well. Those cameras in Israel, Palestine are used to target the Palestinians. They are not used to target the criminalization of the settlers or the soldiers.
I wonder if you guys have one last thing to say, at least maybe to, continuing our work. I know you guys just gave really good suggestions, very good, not just comparisons between our contexts, but also how people are working against the system. So yeah, I wonder if you guys have one last thing to say before we end the session today.
I'd like to give thanks to the many volunteer and private lawyers who are working with undocumented persons in the United States. When we hear these stories, we think of just maybe the violence at a Broadview or the tear gas in the neighborhood, but this administration, much like I think the Netanyahu administration, is undermining the rule of law by just even eliminating much of the due process. Just trying to be a lawyer and to explain to your clients what is happening is very, very difficult. When you can't get access to your clients and try to come back to their family and say, I can't get through to them, the perseverance that's needed. So pray for those who are also working, because the system itself is being attacked, not just the undocumented, not just the Palestinians. And we need to do that in all of our countries, because the authoritarian impulse is really to not have transparency, not have due process. And so I give thanks for the many, not just for the ones who pray, the ones who stand in the streets, the ones who advocate in the courts of law. When we know that the game is rigged against us, and yet we start to see some of these small victories and small miracles that have ramifications for all. So, and thank you all for all the work you do. It's always been encouraging to hear what you're all doing every week on these sessions.
I would just add, show up in whatever way you can. Whether it's if you're a praying person, it's through prayer, it's being in the street, it's joining a boycott. There are so many ways to show up, and we just each need to continue to find unfolding ways to show up for migrants, for Palestinians, and really for the sake of humanity in our world.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Craig, for giving us the time to present this. And we hope we can get your article out soon so that people can also read the work that you're doing and your analysis. So I really appreciate you guys being here.
Can you
And
tell us when is that book is going to be published in 2026? Because there's many chapters. There's other chapters.
Yeah. So it would probably be sometime after January. And we'll keep you updated, obviously, with the process. But yeah.
I found one typo already in doing this research for this, so I got to correct that.
We're so grateful for Sabeel, because since we have come back, we were connected here in Chicago, but since we've come back, we're connected internationally. And I'm just deeply grateful. Thank you so much.
Yes, absolutely. And I welcome everyone who's, in this call. I know some of you have just returned from a Sabeel delegation, but to visit Sabeel and be on Sabeel delegations, especially next year, we continue to try to bear witness and do the work on the ground. So if you're interested in that, I'll put the link to if you want to sign up for a delegation or organize a delegation. So thank you. I'll stop the recording now just so that I can share a few actions as people leave. Maybe they can have some actions this week to do.